Good evening. Great to be with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let me just finish setting this up. Had a little bit of a glitch getting online, but it's coming together now. 1 second. Here we go. Very good. Okay. Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, Karen in Northern California, Shandora in the Bronx, Stephen in New Hampshire, Lucy in Minnesota, Joseph in Massachusetts, Bella in Florida, Bill in Missouri, Peggy in Colorado, Melissa in Great Neck, David in Indiana, Paul in the Great Northwest, and it skipped. Paul in the Great Northwest, Belle in North Texas, Guy in Ohio, Leona in Southern Illinois, Sharon Erito from Lebanon, New Jersey, honoring my dad's yahrzeit. Yes, you are. And in fact, I'll just mention right now that tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our own Sharon Frant Brooks in honor of my father, Michal David Ben Yecheskel. His yahrzeit is tonight, Wednesday night and Thursday. And he was a lover of Jewish learning. Sharon, he must be so proud, cavelling in Shemayim over his daughter, and not only her love of Jewish learning, but the way she shares that love with so many students. It's really an honor to have you in our class. And may your father's neshama have a tremendous aliyah in the world of souls. We say amen. And Sharon, thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of AT Daily, you can donate at accidentaltalmudist.org. And Nina will put the link in the comments. Also in the house, Jonathan in California, who lived in Costa Rica for 2 years, and it sounded just like this recording from the jungle that we've been playing in the timer. Joe in the Inland Empire, Tom in Pennsylvania, Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago, Norman in Ohio, Jeff in Panama. Jeff in Panama, bienvenido. Nancy, North Carolina. Everyone's saying amen to the blessings for Sharon. Beautiful. Also, Aoife checking in from Florida, Marjorie in Georgia, Ella saying shalom, and Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. Also, very happy Yom Ha'atzmaut to you all. Today, it started last night, but today is Israel's Independence Day, celebrating that we live in a time that Jews longed for 2,000 years to have a Jewish state in the land of Israel. The temple hasn't been rebuilt yet. It's not, when Mashiach comes, it will be the land of Israel like the promised land was when the tabernacle and then the temple were standing. But many would say that this is the dawning of that age, and the fact that Jews have a state to call their own in the world for the first time in thousands of years. It's incredible. It's a miracle. And thank God we have witnessed, we have lived to see that. And we say amen. Okay. Where are we? Okay, going to do a double daf today. We've been running about 3 pages behind. So rather than try to do a highlight show and catch all 3 at once, today we'll just do 2 pages, so we'll get a little bit closer to being on the Daf Yomi schedule. So today we are in chapter 4 here of Tractate Sotah, the 18th volume of the Talmud. Our pages are 25 and 26, and we're continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 4. The tractate is about the laws of the suspected adulteress, the Sotah, who was warned by her husband, do not seclude yourself with a particular man. In front of witnesses, he gave the warning. She did not heed the warning, secluded herself with that man. 2 witnesses saw it. And then her husband took her to a rabbinic court in his town. All of this only possible when the temple was standing in Jerusalem. And he said, my wife violated the warning. The warning was witnessed. The violation was witnessed. So now she becomes the Sotah, the suspected adulteress. We don't know what happened behind closed doors when she secluded herself with the alleged lover. But it's possible she committed adultery. So the way for her to prove her innocence, as she and her husband, chaperoned by 2 Torah scholars, go to Jerusalem, to the temple. She drinks the bitter water. There's nothing in it but just some dirt from the temple floor, some ink from the verse. I think Nina's reminding me I didn't light the candle. Very good. I'm a little verklempt. Okay. Right, and so there's just some dirt from the temple floor, some ink from the verses, a little bit of wormwood for a bitter flavor. If she's innocent, she's fine, and now the husband and wife become permitted to each other again. If she's guilty and she drinks the water, she'll die. But if she has some merit, that death might be delayed a little bit. If she refuses to drink, well, that's a kind of admission of guilt. She doesn't have to drink, she doesn't have to die, but she and her husband will remain prohibited to each other. They must divorce, and she does not receive the ketubah payment. Okay, here in chapter 4, we're talking about some exceptions to the Sotah ritual. We picked this up near the top of page 25a. A dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to a woman who violates the precepts of halacha, of Jewish law, or Jewish custom with regard to modesty, who may be divorced without payment of her marriage contract. Right? So a husband can divorce his wife. It doesn't have to go all the way to the extent that she committed adultery, at which point divorce is mandatory. But if she was just behaving in a very unbecoming manner, licentious, immodest, a manner unbecoming of a Jewish woman, that would be cause for divorce, right? So the dilemma was raised before the sages. Well, this woman who violates precepts of Jewish law or custom with regard to modesty, who may be divorced without payment of the marriage contract, is forewarning from her husband required in order to cause her to forfeit her right to collect the payment of her marriage contract, or is forewarning not required? Do we say that since she is a woman who violates the precepts, forewarning is not required, as she is aware that her actions are prohibited, or perhaps forewarning is required so that if she desires to repent, she will be reminded to repent? Right? And why is this coming up here in Tractate Sotah? What we're saying is, well, with respect to adultery, when her behavior seems to be leaning in that direction, the husband has to issue a warning, and then the Sotah ritual kicks in. Well, when there's other causes for divorce, must he give her a warning first? Or can he just, say, that's it, we're getting divorced, and she loses her ketubah payment because she's the one who violated these precepts of Jewish law or custom? So the Gemara suggests, come in here a proof from the Mishna, a betrothed woman and a widow awaiting her yavam, neither drink the bitter water nor collect payment of their marriage contracts. Right, this is we talked about yesterday, the betrothed woman or the widow awaiting her yavam, who are warned not to seclude themselves with a particular guy, and they do. The Sotah ritual does not apply to them because they're not, quote, under their husbands, right? They haven't begun their married life with their husband yet, so the Sotah ritual doesn't apply. They're not going to remain in their betrothal, or they're not going to perform yibum because they behaved in this, manner of disregarding the husband's warning not to seclude themselves with a man who's not the betrothed or the yavam. And so they lose their ketubah payment. But they don't have a chance to prove their innocence by drinking the bitter water because the Sotah ritual doesn't apply to them. Now, how can we extend that law to this question of, forget adultery, it's a woman who violates Jewish law, Jewish custom, and other immodest manners, in other matters of immodesty, does the husband have to give her the warning or not? Right? So the Gemara suggests, come in here a proof from our Mishnah, the betrothed woman and widow awaiting her yavam, they neither collect payment of the marriage contract or drink. Now, it is possible to infer that she does not drink, but the husband or yavam can warn her against secluding herself with another man. So for what law is his warning relevant, right? If the Sotah ritual does not apply to either the betrothed woman or the widow awaiting her yavam, then why are you issuing a warning? A warning is only to begin the Sotah ritual process. So for what law would this warning be relevant? Is it not relevant to cause her to forfeit her right to collect payment of her marriage contract? Accordingly, a woman forfeits payment of her marriage contract due to immodest behavior only if she is warned, according to this view. Abaye says no. The relevance of the warning of the husband or yavam, of the betrothed man or the yavam, is to render her forbidden to him in the event that she secludes herself with another man. Meaning, right, if she violates that warning and secludes herself with the man she was warned not to seclude herself with, and that's witnessed, so it's not only that she doesn't drink the bitter water because she's not a wife, she doesn't receive the ketubah payment, and she becomes forbidden to the betrothed man or to the yavam. Now, Rav Papa says the relevance of the warning is to have her drink if she secludes herself with another man when she is married. As it is taught in the Baraisa, one does not issue a warning to a betrothed woman in order to have her drink while she is betrothed. However, one can issue a warning to a betrothed woman, and then they get married, and then he takes her to Jerusalem to drink the bitter water. Then she is, they are properly married, and at that point she could drink, even based on a warning that was issued when they were merely betrothed. Now, on this question of who is the woman who violates Jewish law or custom with respect to modesty, the Mishna in Tractate Kesuvos discusses two types of women who may be divorced without payment of their marriage contracts. A woman who violates the precepts of Moses, and a woman who violates the precepts of Jewish women, i.e. custom. So a woman who violates the precepts of Moses, i.e. violates Jewish law, is one who violates Torah law. So the early commentaries explain that this applies specifically to a woman who violates Torah law in a manner that causes her husband to transgress as well. For example, a woman who serves him untithed food or engages in sexual intercourse with him without immersing in the mikveh after her menses. Right? In other words, if she's not following the laws of family purity, then, when she sleeps with her husband, she's causing him to engage in sinful behavior as well. That's somebody who he can divorce without paying the marriage payment. A woman who won't cook kosher food or serve her husband kosher food, it would be the same thing. Who is the woman who violates the precepts of Jewish women? This is one who conducts herself immodestly in a manner unbefitting a Jewish woman, right? So Jewish women, observant Jewish women, dress modestly, are not engaging in the kind of, crazy overt sexuality that's so common in modern culture. And that would be grounds for a divorce, for an observant Jewish couple. Now, we're going to skip a few paragraphs here where the sages offer proofs of what we just discussed, since we're covering 2 pages today. And now, just so 4 or 5 paragraphs down, a dilemma was raised before the sages. If a woman violates the precepts and her husband desires to maintain her as his wife, may he maintain her as his wife, or may he not maintain her as his wife? Do we say that the merciful one made the requirement to divorce her dependent on the husband's objection to her behavior, as this husband does not raise an objection, so he may maintain her as his wife? Or perhaps, since the Torah objects to this behavior, it is considered as though he objected, as the requirement to divorce her is due to the Torah's objection to this behavior, irrespective of the husband's wishes, right? So if the woman will not follow Jewish law, is it that the husband can divorce her without paying the ketubah payment, or is it that he must divorce her without paying the ketubah payment? The Gemara cites a proof. Come in here, the Mishna, and these are the women to whom the court issues a warning in place of their husbands. Right? Our Mishnah that we're discussing here in chapter 4, one whose husband became a deaf mute or became an imbecile or was incarcerated in prison. In other words, he's not capable of issuing the warning to his wife not to seclude herself with a particular guy. So the court steps in and issues the warning for him. Right? It became known that she seemed to be running around behind his back. He can't issue the warning, so the court issues the warning on his behalf. And if you say that should the husband desire to maintain her as his wife, he may maintain her as his wife, well, then perhaps he may not want the court to warn her. Would the court perform a matter that is perhaps not amenable to the husband? And the Gemara replies, the ordinary situation is that since she is violating the precepts of Jewish law, it is amenable to the husband to divorce her, and the court acts under this assumption. A new dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to a husband who issued a warning to his wife and later retracted his warning, as he did not wish his wife to acquire the status of a Sotah. Is his warning retracted, or is it not retracted? Do we say that the merciful one made acquiring the status of a Sotah dependent on the husband's warning, and the husband retracted his warning? Or perhaps, since he warned her at the outset, he can no longer retract his warning. So the Gemara cites proof that the husband cannot retract his warning. Come in here the Mishna, and these are the women to whom the court issues a warning in place of the husband. One whose husband became a deaf-mute or an imbecile or was incarcerated in prison. And if you say that in the case of a husband who retracted his warning is retracted, would we, meaning the court, do something that the husband could come along and then retract? This would cause a diminution of the esteem of the court. And the Gemara replies, the ordinary situation is that a person concurs with the opinion of the court and would not retract a warning issued by the court, so this is not a concern. Therefore, no proof can be brought from the Mishnah as to this question. So the Gemara cites a different proof. Come in here, a different Mishnah, the one we had on 7a of this tractate. When the husband takes the Sotah to the temple, he first takes her to the local court. And the court provides him with 2 Torah scholars who accompany them. Why? Lest the husband and wife engage in sexual intercourse on their way to the temple, which is prohibited due to her status as a Sotah. And if you say that with regard to a husband who retracted his warning is retracted, so let him retract his warning and engage in sexual intercourse with her. And the Gemara replies that perhaps the husband can retract his warning. So what is different about Torah scholars, that they are chosen to accompany the husband? Well, they differ from other people as they are learned. And if they see that the husband desires to engage in sexual intercourse with his wife, they say to him, retract your warning, and then you may engage in sexual intercourse with her in a permitted manner. So the Gemara cites a different proof. Come in here, that which Rabbi Yoshia says. Zerah, who was one of the men of Jerusalem, told me 3 matters. A husband who retracted his warning is retracted. And in the case of a rebellious elder whom the court wishes to forgive, the court may forgive him. And in the case of a stubborn and rebellious son whose father and mother wish to forgive him for his sins, they may forgive him. And when I came to my colleagues in the South and told them these rulings, they agreed with me with regard to 2 of them, but with regard to forgiving a rebellious elder, they did not agree with me. They held that a rebellious elder cannot be forgiven in order that discord not proliferate among the Jewish people. So the Gemara comments, one can conclude from Rabbi Yoshia's statement with regard to a husband who retracted his warning, that his warning is retracted. And the Gemara concludes, indeed, one can conclude from Rabbi Yoshia's statement that the husband can retract his warning. Right? So, and where did the law come out? Here's the halacha, according to Shulchan Aruch. The husband can retract his warning before his wife secludes herself with the other man. However, once the seclusion occurs, then he cannot retract his warning. If one divorces his wife, the divorce affects a retraction of the warning. In a case where a husband issues a warning and later divorces his wife and subsequently remarries her, then if he wants to warn her, he must issue a new warning. Right, so that is a way to retract it. He's going to have to divorce her, but then they can remarry and then they can go on with their lives. So there is a mechanism where they can make that work. Now, with respect to these questions that Rabbi Yoshia brought up incidentally, paralleling whether a husband can retract a warning, is whether the Sanhedrin can forgive a rebellious elder and whether parents can forgive a stubborn and rebellious son. What are we talking about there? So the stubborn and rebellious son, this is the case that I think never happened in Jewish history, although we study the law in a bunch of places in the Talmud. But the Torah says that if parents have a son who is stubborn and rebellious and some kind of total glutton and hedonist and, a danger to society. So they can take him to the elders of the city and say, this is our son, he's stubborn and rebellious and will come to no good. And they will pass a death sentence on him, and then he is stoned and executed. So elsewhere in the Talmud, the sages say, well, how big a glutton does he have to be to trigger that execution? And they say something like he'd have to eat an elephant, right? They make the requirements so absurd that it could never happen, right? So they have to deal with it because the law is in the Torah, but they legislated that law out of existence, lest some parents who are just so frustrated with a child would seek to have a court execute the child. Now, a more serious and interesting case, I would say, is the case of the rebellious elder. Who is the rebellious elder? Explains Rav Steinsaltz. Whenever there was a major dispute among the sages as to how a halachic practice should be performed, the matter was brought before the great sanhedrin for clarification and resolution. So if the Sanhedrin did not reach a unanimous conclusion, the matter was decided according to the majority, and the decision was binding upon the entire nation. A sage could disagree with that decision, but he was obliged to follow the opinion of the majority and to instruct others to do so. If a sage who was ordained and fit to serve in the great Sanhedrin instructed others to follow his opinion in contradiction of the opinion of the majority, he was deemed a rebellious elder. So imagine, if in America, the Supreme Court had a very important decision before it, and there was a split decision, which is almost always the case. The majority went one way, the minority went the other way, and then the minority got on TV, a member of the minority got on TV and says, this law is wrong, and you should not follow it. That would be a huge national problem, right? And so it would have been in a Torah society in ancient Israel. And so if there was such an elder who told the people not to follow the majority ruling of the Sanhedrin, that would actually be a death penalty offense. We don't see any cases like that. It came close in that terrible dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the rest of the sages about the oven of Achnai, where Eliezer was sure that he was right, the majority were wrong, and even a voice from heaven backed up Rabbi Eliezer, but the nation followed the majority. Eliezer wouldn't follow that law, and they excommunicated him, but he didn't instruct other people to follow his own ruling. And so he would not have been deemed a rebellious elder. He was excommunicated because it became impossible for him to work with the other sages, but he wasn't the rebellious elder according to this law. Now, Rav Acha and Ravina disagree with regard to the limits of this law permitting a husband to retract his warning. One says that if he retracts his warning before her seclusion with another man, then the warning is retracted. But if he retracts his warning after the seclusion, it is not retracted. And as we read, that's the law, and the other view was the opposite of that. And the Gemara asks, from where can we derive that after the wife's seclusion with another man, the warning cannot be retracted? It can be derived from the answer that the rabbis gave in reply to Rabbi Yosei. As is taught in Baraisa, Rabbi Yosei says, it is unnecessary to provide an escort to accompany the Sotah and her husband, as the husband of a Sotah is trusted not to engage in sexual intercourse with her on the basis of a kal v'chomer inference, an a fortiori inference, and just as in the case of a menstruating woman who is prohibited from engaging in sexual intercourse with her husband by penalty of kares, excision at the hands of the heavenly court, her husband is nevertheless trusted not to have sex with his wife when she is having her period. So too, with regard to a Sotah who is prohibited from engaging in sexual intercourse with her husband only by an ordinary prohibition, is it not all the more so that he should be trusted? And the rabbis said to Rabbi Yosei, no. If you say that he is trusted with regard to a menstruating woman, the reason is not due to the severity of the prohibition. Rather, he is trusted because she has the ability to become permitted to him again if he'll just wait a few days. But shall we say the same with regard to a Sotah who potentially will not become permitted to her husband again due to her suspected adultery? And that's why the husband can retract his warning until she actually goes and secludes herself with that man and it's witnessed. At that point, he can no longer retract. The interesting thing is, well, he can no longer retract, but Does he have to appear before the rabbinic court and get the Torah scholars to accompany him so that they can go do the Sotah ritual? You know, what happens if he just keeps his mouth shut at that point because he doesn't want to go through all of that? Well, I think he would be violating Jewish law at that point because he can no longer retract, as we've just learned. And the Gemara explains the proof. And if you say that after her seclusion with another man, the warning can be retracted for her, you therefore find an instance in which the Sotah has the ability to become permitted to her husband. As if the husband desires, he can retract the warning and engage in sexual intercourse with her. Rather, conclude from the rabbis who overruled Rabbi Yosef that if he retracts his warning after her seclusion with this other man, the warning is not retracted. And the Gemara concludes, indeed, one can so conclude. Now, we're going to skip a few more paragraphs having to do with the law of if the husband and wife are on their way to Jerusalem to perform the ritual and the husband dies. So then what happens? Bottom line, we already covered it. She does not drink the water, and his estate does not pay the ketubah payment because she secluded herself with that man that she was warned not to seclude herself with. Now we're on page 26a. The Baraisa continues, a woman who was pregnant with the child of another man at the time of her marriage, and a woman who was nursing the child of another man at the time of her marriage, neither drink the bitter water nor collect payment of their marriage contracts, as their marriages were prohibited by rabbinic law. Right? So whenever we have a marriage that is for some reason prohibited, if that husband warns the wife not to seclude herself, and she does seclude herself, she doesn't drink the water because the Sotah ritual doesn't apply to marriages that are not really marriages because they are prohibited. This is a rabbinic decree that a woman who is pregnant or has a newborn should not marry a new husband until 24 months have passed from the birth of this child from, her earlier husband. And if they do get married, earlier than that, and she secludes herself with a different man and he warns her, etc., the bitter water doesn't apply because that marriage was prohibited by rabbinic decree. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Now, the reason for this is, as Rabbi Meir would say, a man may not marry a woman who is pregnant with the child of another man or a woman who is nursing the child of another man until 24 months pass after the baby's birth. Why? So as to ensure that the woman will not become pregnant while the child needs to nurse. And if he married her, he must divorce her and may never remarry her, as the sages penalized him for transgressing the prohibition. That's Rabbi Meir's view. And the rabbis say he must divorce her, and when his time to marry her arrives, meaning after 24 months from the baby's birth, he can marry her again. The sages were not so intense about enforcing their decree. It doesn't become prohibited to her forever, but they can't be married until 24 months have passed. If they married in violation of the decree, they must divorce, and then they can marry again when the 24 months have passed. And the Brisa continues, in the case of a young man who married a barren woman or an elderly woman, and he did not have a wife and children beforehand, right? So this is a guy who is technically violating Peru Urevu. You shall bear fruit. Why can't I say this now, right? Peru Urevu, as I say it in Hebrew, you shall be fruitful and multiply, right? It's the first command given to the world by God. And so women are not obligated in that command because childbirth is dangerous, but men are. And a man has not fulfilled that obligation until he has had at least 2 children, a boy and a girl, according to Beis Hillel, which is what we follow. At least a boy and a girl. So in the case of a young man who married a woman who cannot give him children, so then he violated that precept, right? He should be marrying a woman who has the possibility to bear children for him, and these women cannot. So in that case, if he's in that kind of a marriage and he warns her not to seclude herself with some guy and she does, they might have to part company and she doesn't get the ketubah payment, but she cannot drink the bitter water because this marriage should not have happened. Now, Rabbi Elazar says, wrong, this marriage is not forbidden, as he can marry another woman and procreate through her, and therefore she can drink the bitter water. And the Baraisa continues, however, in the case of one who issued a warning to his betrothed or his yavama while she was a widow awaiting her yavam, and she secluded herself with the other man, after he consummated the marriage, she either drinks the bitter water or does not collect the marriage contract. Right? We saw this before. With a betrothed woman or a widow awaiting her yavam, she can't drink the bitter water to prove her innocence if she was warned while she's betrothed or while she's a widow waiting her yavam, and then she secludes herself with that man she was warned about while she's betrothed or while she's a widow waiting her yavam. But if the warning happened during betrothal or during the waiting period for her yavam, and then they got married, and then she secluded herself with that man, then she could drink the bitter water to prove her innocence. Now, if his own pregnant or nursing wife becomes a sotah, then despite the concern that the bitter water may harm the fetus, she either drinks the bitter water or does not collect payment of her marriage contract. Now, in the case of a young man who married a barren woman or an elderly woman, and he already had a wife and children and was therefore permitted to marry his barren or elderly wife, the woman either drinks the bitter water or does not collect the marriage contract. And the Brisa concludes with regard to the wife of a mamzer, right? So a mamzer, generally would be translated as a bastard, but it's a little bit more specific than that, right? A mamzer is somebody where there was a Jewish husband and wife, and she committed adultery with a different Jewish man, and had a baby of that man she committed adultery with. That baby is a mamzer. And a mamzer is not allowed to marry a Jew who is not a mamzer, right? A mamzer can only marry another mamzer or somebody else who is disqualified in a similar manner. So with regard to the wife of a mamzer who is married to a mamzer, in a permitted marriage, right? Two mamzers can marry each other. And with respect to the wife of a gibeonite who is married to a gibeonite in a permitted marriage, and the wife of a convert or an emancipated slave, and a sexually underdeveloped woman. If any of these women becomes a sotah, because she's in a permitted marriage, she either drinks the bitter water or does not collect payment of the marriage contract, as these marriages are permitted, and therefore the sotah ritual and procedure does apply to these women. After citing this entire Brisa, the Gemara explains the difficulty why we brought up this long Brisa. In any event, the Brisa teaches that an alonis, a sexually underdeveloped woman, right, a barren woman, can drink the bitter water if the marriage is permitted. And this is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav Nachman. And the Gemara answers, Rav Nachman could have said to you, there is a dispute between Tanaim, the sages of the Mishna, with regard to this matter. And I state my opinion in accordance with the opinion of this Tana, as it is taught in a Brisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, an alonis, the sexually underdeveloped woman, neither drinks nor collects payment of the marriage contract, as it is stated, and she shall be cleared and shall conceive seed, indicating that the Sotah ritual pertains only to one who is capable of bearing seed and give birth. And this excludes this sexually underdeveloped woman whose way is not to bear seed. Then we skip a couple of paragraphs on that subject. And now we could return to the wife of the mamzer that was brought up by our Baraisa. Now, the wife of a mamzer who is married to a mamzer, this is a permitted marriage. So if she's warned not to seclude herself with a particular man and she does so, she either drinks the bitter water to prove her innocence, or they divorce and she does not collect payment of her marriage contract. And the Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? Since their marriage is permitted, why should the Sotah ritual not apply? The Gemara answers, it is necessary to state this, lest you say that she should not drink, since if she drinks and is found to be innocent of adultery, she would then be permitted again to her husband. And this is undesirable, since their offspring are also mamzerim. The child of a mamzer married to a mamzer is another mamzer. And we do not cause the number of individuals of flawed lineage who cannot marry into the general Jewish community to proliferate. Right? So you might think that we would discourage mamzers from marrying mamzers, which is permitted, but we might use a law like this to kind of discourage them from having more children. You might think that, but you'd be wrong. Right? Mamzers are permitted to marry mamzers and have children, and we don't try to discourage them from doing that, even though those children would be disqualified from marrying other Jews. Now, the aforementioned Baraisa in the Tosefta states, the wife of a convert or an emancipated slave and the alonis, the sexually underdeveloped woman, can drink the better water. And the Gemara says, isn't that obvious? They are in permitted marriages. Why shouldn't they be able to drink the bitter water if they were warned not to seclude, and they did? The Gemara answers, it is necessary to state this law, lest you say that she does not drink. As the verse states, speak to the children of Israel and say unto them, if the wife of any man goes astray and acts unfaithfully against him. Now, one might have inferred from this verse that the Sotah ritual applies only to those born as Jews and not to converts. And the Baraisa and the Tosefta therefore teaches us that this is not so. And the Gemara asks, why not say that indeed the verse excludes converts? And the Gemara answers, the subsequent term, and say unto them, is an amplification which serves to include converts, right? So all Jews in permitted marriages are subject to the law of the Sotah, whether they were born Jews or not. That is the law. We're going to skip a few paragraphs about the wife of a priest who was warned not to seclude, and she secluded. She may drink the bitter water. She's in a permitted marriage. Why wouldn't she drink? And they go through the same kind of a proof. And now we get to the Mishna states, the wife of a eunuch drinks, right? So before we talked about a woman who is incapable of mothering a child, now we're going to talk about a man who's incapable of fathering a child, right? So the wife of a eunuch drinks. And the Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? Their marriage is permitted. Why should the Sotah ritual not apply? And the Gemara replies, it is necessary to state this, lest you say that she does not drink, since the merciful one states with regard to the Sotah, that if you have gone astray while under your husband, and if you are defiled, and some man has lain with you besides your husband. And this indicates that her husband had lain with her. And this husband, the eunuch, is not capable of that. And the Mishnah therefore teaches us that the wife of a eunuch does drink the bitter water. The Mishnah states a husband can issue a warning to his wife with regard to all those with whom relations are forbidden. So he can say, now this is a permitted marriage. So you would think, well, any man that is like having too much conversation with his wife, where he's getting jealous and he's thinking that they might be committing adultery, or they might come close to commit adultery, he says, don't seclude yourself with that man. Now, what difference should it make if that man would be prohibited to his wife by some other prohibition? Like, for example, he's her relative. So not only would it be committing adultery for her to have relations with that man, but it would also be incest, right? So since there's a separate prohibition at work, you might think that the Sotah ritual wouldn't apply. And so therefore, as the Torah states, and she was defiled 2 times. Now, one verse teaches that she is defiled and forbidden to her husband, and one verse teaches that she is forbidden to her paramour. So one might understand that the Sotah ritual applies only where she is forbidden to the paramour due to this licentious intercourse, meaning the potential adultery. However, with regard to that woman who secluded herself with a forbidden relative, since the woman already stands prohibited to him due to the prohibition of incest, one might say that the Sotah ritual does not apply. And this Mishnah therefore teaches us that one can issue a warning in a case like that, even with regard to forbidden relatives. Now we're going to skip a few paragraphs where it's quite, can the husband issue a warning with respect to a man that it's not prohibited to her, but it's a man who's impotent? In other words, can he say, don't seclude yourself with that eunuch, right, who would be incapable of having sex with her, even if she wanted to commit adultery with him? You would think maybe the Sotah ritual does not apply there, and the answer is the Sotah ritual does apply even in such a case. We pick it up a few paragraphs down, where one can one issue a warning with respect to a Gentile, right? So he said he can issue a warning to her, don't seclude yourself with that man who's your relative, don't seclude yourself with that man who is impotent, and it works. What about don't seclude yourself with that man who is a Gentile? Why is a Gentile being brought up? Because a Jewish woman is prohibited from marrying a Gentile, so perhaps the Sotah ritual wouldn't apply if she's committing adultery with a Gentile. So the Gemara suggests another explanation, that perhaps our Mishnah serves to exclude a Gentile and teaches that one cannot issue a warning with regard to him. And the Gemara asks, but didn't Rav Hamnuna say one can issue a warning with regard to a Gentile? And if a Gentile engages in sexual intercourse, for example, with the daughter of a priest, he disqualifies her from partaking of teruma. Not adultery here is the situation, but rather that the daughter of a priest, slept with someone who was not her husband, that would render her a zona, right? Which is, it's another word for a prostitute, but in this case, a woman who engaged in forbidden, premarital sex. And that would disqualify her from, I believe, ever marrying a priest, and disqualifying her from eating consecrated food in her father's house. Right? But didn't Rav Hamnuna say one can issue a warning with regard to a Gentile, and if a Gentile engages in sexual intercourse with the daughter of a priest, he disqualifies her from partaking of teruma. Now the Gemara asks with regard to Rav Hamnuna's statement that one can issue a warning with regard to a Gentile. Isn't that obvious? The Gemara answers, no, it is necessary, lest you say that one cannot issue a warning in this case, because the verse states, and she was defiled, Numbers 5:13, and she was defiled, Numbers 5:14, right? In the Sotah passage, it talks about her being defiled twice. So one verse teaches that she is defiled and forbidden to her husband, and one verse teaches that she is forbidden to her paramour. Right? If a woman commits adultery and she has to divorce her husband, can she then go and marry her lover? No, she's forever prohibited to the man that she slept with, which caused her to divorce her husband. She doesn't become permitted to her lover. So one might understand that the Sotah ritual applies only where she is forbidden to the paramour due to the adultery that she committed with him. However, with regard to that woman who engaged in sexual intercourse with a Gentile, since she already stands prohibited to him, right? A Jewish woman can't marry a Gentile, so one might say that the Sotah ritual does not apply. And Rav Hamnuna therefore teaches us that one can issue a warning even with regard to a Gentile. So the Gemara asks with regard to Rav Hamnuna's statement that a Gentile who engages in sexual intercourse with the daughter of a priest disqualifies her from partaking of teruma, the consecrated food that only priests can eat. Isn't that obvious? And the Gemara answers, it is necessary, lest you say that he does not disqualify her. As the merciful one states in the Torah, and if a priest's daughter should be unto a strange man, she shall not eat of that which is set apart from the holy things. She can no longer eat teruma, indicating that if a woman engages in sexual intercourse with one who is unfit for her, he disqualifies her from partaking of teruma. Now, since the term should be unto denotes marriage, one might say that one who is eligible for betrothal, yes, he disqualifies the woman, but a Gentile who is not eligible for betrothal does not disqualify her. And Rav Hamnuna therefore teaches us that a Gentile does disqualify the woman from partaking of teruma, as one can learn from the ruling of Rabbi Yochanan. And this is, as Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, from where is it derived that a Gentile or a slave who engaged in sexual intercourse with the daughter of a priest, or with the daughter of a Levite, or with the daughter of an Israelite, disqualified her from marrying a priest and from partaking of teruma? This is derived, as it is stated, but if a priest's daughter should be a widow or a divorcee, she returns to her father's house, and then she may eat her father's bread. And this indicates that the daughter of a priest returns to eat of her father's bread, meaning teruma, if she engaged in sexual intercourse with one whose marriage to her has the potential to end in widowhood or divorce. In other words, a Jew whom she is permitted to marry. And this excludes a Gentile and a slave whose marriage to her does not have the potential to end in widowhood or divorce, since the marriage was never permitted to begin with. Since Rav Hamnuna's statement contradicts the suggestion that the Mishnah excludes a Gentile, the Gemara asks, okay, so the Sotah ritual does not exclude a Gentile. The husband can warn her not to seclude herself with a Gentile. So who is excluded? Right? Who does not come under the Sotah ritual, so that if she's warned against, sleeping with that kind of a person, there's no warning against that kind of a person because he's outside the framework of the Sotah ritual. So rather, what does the term "and one who is not a man" serve to exclude? And Rav Papa says this serves to exclude an animal, as the concept of licentiousness does not apply with regard to an animal. Therefore, the laws of a Sotah do not apply in this case, right? Like, if he's afraid that his wife is committing bestiality, okay, that's grounds for divorce, and he won't have to pay the ketubah payment. But he doesn't issue a warning, don't seclude yourself with that animal, and then if she secludes herself with that animal, she's got to drink the bitter water to prove that, she didn't commit bestiality. That's outside the framework of the Sotah ritual. That does not work under this framework, so the warning is not issued for that kind of a case. There's other laws involved, but not these. And so Rava Parzakia said to Rav Ashi, from where is this matter that the sages stated derived? That the licentiousness of a sotah does not apply with regard to an animal. And Rav Ashi replied that it is, as it is written, you shall not bring the hire of a harlot or the price of a dog into the house of the Lord your God for any vow, for both of them are an abomination to the Lord your God. And this verse prohibits one from sacrificing an animal that served as payment to a prostitute or as payment for the purchase of a dog. I'm almost done. If you've got questions or comments, get them in. And it is taught in a Mishna, Tamura 30a, in the converse cases, the hire of a dog, meaning that a kosher animal was given to the owner of a dog as payment for engaging in intercourse with it, and the price of a prostitute, i.e. a kosher animal was served, which served as payment in the purchase of a maidservant acquired for prostitution, that they are permitted to be sacrificed, as it is stated in the aforementioned verse, for both of them. And this term indicates that only those two animals may not be sacrificed, meaning those which served as the hire of a harlot and as the price of a dog, and not four animals, as the reverse cases are excluded from this particular law. It's unseemly, you don't do that, but it doesn't come under that law. And this indicates that the concept of licentiousness does not apply with regard to animals, as the payment for intercourse with a dog is not considered payment for prostitution. And the Gemara asks, Shmuel states that one can issue a warning with regard to a shahuf, even though he is unable to ejaculate, and therefore he cannot bear seed. Still, a husband can warn his wife not to seclude herself with that sort of man. So then rather, why do I need the verse to state, and a man lay with her carnally, shikhavat zera, at Numbers 5:13, and the Gemara answers, it is necessary for that which is taught in the Baraisa. The term shikhavat zera excludes something else, and I'm just going to sum up these final paragraphs of page 26b, which bottom line, the husband can warn his wife, don't seclude yourself with that man because you might commit adultery with him. And she might think, well, if we don't have sex in the regular way, but we do it in the irregular way, not in front, not this opening, but that opening, that somehow this law would not be triggered. And the answer is sex, no matter which opening the couple uses, it would still constitute adultery. And if she drank the bitter waters, it would kill her. If she didn't, if she refused to drink, it would be cause for divorce and not pay the marriage settlement, etc. Either kind of sex counts as sex, and she would be guilty of committing adultery if she engaged in it. Okay, let's go to questions or comments here on pages 25 and 26 of Tractate Sotah. Bill, question about Jewish laws practiced in the modern era. Historically, a man couldn't be unfaithful as such because if he slept with an unmarried woman, he had essentially just acquired another wife. Right. However, for 1,000 years, that hasn't been an option. Correct. So in the modern era, does a man's adultery also require obligatory divorce just as a woman's does? Excellent question. I don't know. I can't answer that offhand. I just don't know the law offhand. My guess, yes. I think this is grounds for divorce. The issue, of course, is that in the Orthodox world, right, unless they included, and this kind of exists, a clause in the ketubah that she can demand divorce for the same reasons he can demand divorce. If that's not included at the outset, then she can't demand a divorce, right? And that's what causes the terrible aguna situation, where a woman wants a divorce, the husband won't give it to her, and she's stuck until the community compels him to divorce this, woman who is miserable in this marriage and doesn't want to be with this man any longer. Now, I believe that if the husband committed adultery and she goes to the Beis Din, right, the rabbinic court, and says, "Look, he cheated on me. I don't want to be in this marriage anymore, and he won't give me a bill of divorce," I'm sure that would be grounds for the Beis Din to step in and force the man to give the bill of divorce. But that's me guessing. I'm not a rabbi, definitely not an expert in this law, or really any law. So I'd have to look it up, and I don't know the answer offhand. Great question. Sharon, I don't remember in Gittin that a woman who gets a regular divorce, regardless of cause, losing her ketubah payment. Did I miss it? I think in a regular divorce, no, she never loses her ketubah payment. The only grounds for losing her ketubah payment is that she behaved in a manner outside of Jewish law, and that's why they're getting divorced, right? So if the husband is the one who cheated, probably you weren't answering Bill's question when you wrote that comment, but you know, if there's anything other than she refused to follow Jewish law, and that's why he's divorcing her, which you know is the same idea as adultery, that would cause her to lose her ketubah payment. Any other grounds for divorce would not. Jonathan, somewhat off topic, but the law is about restricting relationships for children of an unmarried relationship feels like punishing the innocent. Mida keneged mida seems to be out of whack here. So what Jonathan is saying is, so the offspring of two mamzers who married each other, why should that child be a mamzer? What did that child do? That child is innocent. Agree. Feels unfair. I don't understand that law well enough. And I wonder if there is a way for such a child to sort of re-enter the community. Sometimes the sages sort of create a mechanism, where they can, I don't know, like become enslaved and then go free quickly, and then it's like they're essentially born again. I'm making that one up, but they have kind of mechanisms like that, and perhaps there's one, where the mamzer, the offspring of two mamzers, can somehow re-enter the community, but I don't know what it is. And I wonder if this is forever, and it was just meant to be a terrible incentive or disincentive, for people to commit adultery and produce a mamzer. I mean, it's a terrible situation for that child to be in. Needless to say, if that child just leaves the Jewish community, he's going to do whatever he wants to do. This mamzer status only matters, within the Jewish community. But it just seems like such a sad price to pay for something that the child is completely innocent of. But sadly, there are a lot of there are a lot of crimes and immoral behavior that children end up paying a price for, even though they did nothing, and their parents, were the ones who engaged in it. But that's what it means that God punishes to the next generation, to the third and fourth generation, right? We learn that God is a great and forgiving God, but also a zealous God who punishes wickedness to the third and fourth generation, but rewards pious and good actions for 1,000 generations. And what would that mean? I've heard it said that punishing up to the third and fourth generation, that's not like heaven intercedes and makes the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of wicked people suffer. It's just they bring that to their families. People who, commit crimes and end up in prison or whatever their punishment is, certainly harm their children and even their grandchildren and great-grandchildren through their own actions and natural consequences. But God sort of looks out for the families of people who try to live righteous lives. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, the regular time, for our next daf, at least page 27. Maybe we'll do 2 pages and try to get closer to being caught up to the daf yomi schedule. Now, we're very close. I think